April 19, 1775. 400 British regulars approached the small village of Lexington, Massachusetts. 80 men of the local militia meet them on the town green. "Stand your ground," their commander shouts. "Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." 2 British companies form a line of battle on the Lexington Green. A British officer orders the militia to disperse. Most of the men begin to scatter, but a few stubbornly stand their ground. A moment later, a shot rings out. Who fired that first shot, heard round the world, may never be known. The British then unleash a full volley into the militia. When the smoke clears, 8 Americans lay dead, and another 10 are wounded. These are the first shots in a war that would rage throughout the American colonies and beyond for 8 years. In search of a rumored stockpile of American weapons, the British advance to Concord. Word of the movement spreads among the American patriots. At Concord, the British find only the remnants of the Patriot stockpile. The real weapons are in the hands of the militia. 500 Americans attack the British column near the Concord River. The British withdraw, the Americans pursue, and it devolves into a running battle. More militiamen, sometimes called minutemen, arrive, using country paths to ambush their exhausted foes. British soldiers are killed or wounded continuously. Most run out of ammunition. Some consider surrendering. The British limp back into Boston, having lost nearly 300 men. Almost miraculously, the American patriots win their first battle. But the revolution has only just begun. Within weeks, Boston is surrounded by an army of New England militia. As news of the victory spreads, other Americans take action. In May, a group of men who call themselves the Green Mountain Boys seize Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York. In June, the British attack an American position near Boston called Bunker Hill. As the Redcoat battle lines approach, an American commander tells his men not to fire until you see the whites of their eyes. The British are slaughtered. Although the British capture the hill, American morale rises as British morale plummets. Never before had substantial numbers of armed and organized American colonists faced off against the professional army of the British Empire. Now, patriots portrayed the conflict as citizen soldiers, rallying to defend their property and communities from a foreign invader. Despite these early successes, American leaders know that they will need more than an enthusiastic militia to win the conflict. The Continental Congress, in session in Philadelphia, creates the Continental Army and appoints George Washington, a member of the Virginia delegation, to lead it. Washington rushes to join the army at Cambridge, Massachusetts, telling Congress that he will need heavy artillery to drive the British out of Boston. Washington is aided by 25-year-old Henry Knox, a former Boston bookseller who studied military history in his shop. Married into a prominent Loyalist family, Knox and his wife were sympathizers to the Patriot cause. Impressed by Knox's participation in Bunker Hill, Washington is persuaded to retrieve artillery pieces from upstate New York. Knox spends the winter removing cannons from Fort Ticonderoga and bringing them to Boston. Despite having to sled across frozen rivers and scale snowy mountains, Knox doesn't lose a single gun. By March of 1776, the American artillery is in place. Unwilling to suffer a bombardment or risk another attack, the British evacuate the city. Washington watches as the fleet sails away. He knows the enemy will soon return, in even greater numbers. The question is where? Washington moves the Continental Army from Boston to New York, anticipating a British attack. By the end of June, 19,000 patriots have joined him. And then, the British return. 130 ships, carrying more than 32,000 soldiers, sail into New York Harbor. One amazed American exclaims that all of London is afloat. August 22nd, the British, commanded by General William Howe, land on Long Island, sweeping aside the American defenders at the Battle of Brooklyn. Washington skillfully retreats across Manhattan to Harlem Heights. In September, the British land on Lower Manhattan and capture the city, then dislodge the Americans from their defenses on Harlem Heights. Washington retreats again. Between September and November, efforts to retain a foothold near New York fail. The Continental Army is reduced to a few thousand soldiers, while the British make Manhattan Island their headquarters in North America. Washington retreats across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. With morale low and enlistments set to expire, all that is stopping the British is the Delaware River and the coming winter. Convinced the rebels are all but defeated, the British spread out in numerous outposts throughout New Jersey. With the rebel capital of Philadelphia as their next target, the British plan to move when spring arrives. Meanwhile, a second contingent of the Continental Army is busy to the north. Detachments of the Northern Department of the Army have been active in upstate New York since the beginning of the war. In 1775, Americans under the command of General Richard Montgomery make a daring attempt to push British forces out of Canada, hoping to inspire support among the local population. However, the Canadian citizenry are never on board with independence, and support for British authority remains strong. In the winter of 1775, after capturing Montreal, the Americans lay siege to Quebec City. On December 31st, General Montgomery attempts to take the city but is killed at the Battle of Quebec. In May 1776, the British are reinforced and the Americans abandon their siege attempt, retreating south to New York. In October, Brigadier General Benedict Arnold fails to thwart the British fleet at the Battle of Valcour Island. Canada remains under British control, and the St. Lawrence River provides the British Army with a means to unload troops and press south into upstate New York. December 1776. Washington must rekindle the confidence of his soldiers while proving to the public the Declaration of Independence is worth fighting for. Knowing the majority of his men's enlistments expire at year's end, the commander-in-chief resorts to his last option: attack the enemy. On Christmas night, 1776, Washington seizes an opportunity. He moves his forces across the ice-choked Delaware River. It is a desperate and dangerous maneuver, but it works. His men gather on the opposite bank, and Washington launches a surprise attack on Trenton, New Jersey. The Battle of Trenton is a stirring American victory. Nearly 1,000 Hessians are captured, along with 6 cannons and enough supplies to outfit several American brigades. 6 days later, Washington presses his advantage by recrossing the Delaware and outmaneuvering the main British Army and striking a Crown garrison at Princeton. He wins another victory and captures nearly 200 British regulars. With his army rejuvenated, Washington marches to Morristown and settles in for the rest of the winter. there is almost constant skirmishing between Patriots and British foraging parties. Attempts by General Howe in April at Bound Brook and in June at the Short Hills failed to draw Washington into a major engagement, leaving the British commander no choice but to quit the state by the end of June, forcing the British garrison of New York City to rely on supplies brought by sea. In the spring of 1777, the British devise a plan to isolate New England from the other American colonies. 3 columns are ordered to converge on Albany, New York. 1 column is stopped at Fort Stanwix. 1 disregards the plan and instead moves towards Philadelphia. After a British landing at the head of Elk, the Continentals established themselves along the Brandywine Creek west of Philadelphia in preparation of the British advance. Washington's battle lines include a vulnerable right flank. General Howe, with General Lord Cornwallis under his command, moves around the flank and attacks, forcing Washington to abandon his battle plan and position a portion of his army to defend against the British assault, biding time for the rest of the Continental Army to retreat. With Washington's defeat, the Continental Congress flees Philadelphia. Howe captures the American capital soon after. Washington attempts to retake the city, but is defeated at the Battle of Germantown. Afterwards, he moves his army to Valley Forge for the winter. The 3rd British column meets heavy resistance in upstate New York from partisan fighters. Battles at Oriskany, Bennington, and Fort Stanwix in the summer of 1777 provide the Americans time to assemble a large force near Saratoga. The fighting at Saratoga rages from September to October. Victory sways in the balance. Finally, the Americans surround the British Army. British General John Burgoyne surrenders to American Major General Horatio Gates. One of the battle's heroes is Major General Benedict Arnold, whose actions later in the war will forever tarnish his name in American history. The main portion of the Continental Army under General Washington suffers through a brutal winter at Valley Forge, but holds together. Discipline actually improves due to the training regimen implemented by Baron von Steuben, a persecuted European officer who lends his expertise to the cause. It's one of the war's greatest displays of American determination. In the wake of the American victory at Saratoga, France signs a treaty of alliance with the United States and declares war on Britain. This changes the British strategy for ending the rebellion. With Britain's global rival entering into the revolution, the fight for American independence becomes a world war. Threatened by the French fleet, the British abandon Philadelphia. Washington pursues them across New Jersey. American skirmishers harassed the British caravan for more than a week. On June 28th, Washington orders Major General Charles Lee to attack the British rear guard at Monmouth, New Jersey. Lee blunders the assault, and Washington is forced to salvage the initiative himself. The battle is inconclusive, and the British continue to New York. With the French fleet lingering off the coast and the failure to isolate the rebellion to New England, the British attempt a southern strategy to win the war. Suspicions that Loyalist support in the South could sway the war in their favor convinces the British to shift its offensive to Savannah, Georgia, and then to Charleston, South Carolina, establishing a foothold in the key port city of the southern colonies. In the north, the British, under the command of Sir Henry Clinton, occupy New York, with Washington maintaining a close presence in the surrounding hills. The American commander-in-chief wants nothing more than to retake the city he'd lost in 1776. The countryside between the armies becomes a no-man's land of spies, foraging parties, and skirmishes. The battles of Newport, Rhode Island, Stony Point, New York, and Springfield, New Jersey, produced no clear victory for either side. In the middle of the summer of 1781, Washington receives intelligence that General Cornwallis is bottlenecked along the York River in Virginia. The Marquis de Lafayette and Major General Baron von Steuben are busy clearing out British raiding parties from the Virginian countryside. Cornwallis sets up fortifications at Yorktown, hoping to be reinforced by the British fleet sailing from New York. Seeing his chance, Washington leaves a portion of the army in the north, while he, accompanied by French General Rochambeau's forces, hurries to link up with Lafayette and Steuben. The French fleet soon arrives off the Virginia Capes, waiting to intercept the British fleet. The French win a naval battle over access to the Chesapeake Bay on September 5th, cutting off Cornwallis's supply chain. French and American forces capture key British redoubts to seal their siege lines. Cornwallis is completely surrounded, unable to obtain supplies by land or sea. In October of 1781, the Siege of Yorktown proves to be the final domino to fall in London, losing half of her New World colonies. Cornwallis surrenders. News of Yorktown reaches London in late November 1781. In February 1782, the British Parliament adopts a resolution against further prosecution of offensive warfare on the continent of North America. The final treaty of peace is signed in September 1783. After 8 years of war, the longest war ever fought in North America, the United States win their independence. The American Revolution began the most important experiment the world has ever witnessed. Can people govern themselves? Can they treat each other as equals? Can liberty produce power? So far, through many rigorous tests, America has answered yes. April 19th, 1775. A shot rings out on Lexington Green. America's war for independence has begun. The eyes of the world are focused on New England, but the clouds of war sweep across the South. In South Carolina, Patriot troops seize Fort Charlotte on the Savannah River and drive Georgia's royal governor from Savannah after the Battle of the Rice Boats. The British are driven from Virginia at the Battle of Great Bridge. Emboldened by their success, South Carolinians establish a constitution to govern the colony independently from King George. In North Carolina, citizens of Mecklenburg County reject the rule of Parliament and the Crown, while the Halifax Resolves direct the North Carolina delegation to the Continental Congress to advocate for independence. But liberty is not the desire of every Southern colonist. South Carolina is the most politically divided. The Low Country, including the major port of Charleston, is a Patriot stronghold, while the Back Country is home to a mixture of both those loyal to the British Crown and to those who want independence. The opposing elements clash in backcountry battles. The first land battle of the South occurs at 96 in November of 1775, where a Loyalist militia besieges a Patriot garrison. In North Carolina, Loyalist recruiting is aflame. On February 27, 1776, Patriot forces fight and crush the Loyalists in the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge, a demoralizing defeat for the British that effectively ended Loyalist activity in North Carolina for years. In June 1776, the British, led by Sir Henry Clinton and Sir Peter Parker, try but fail to capture Charleston by land and sea in the Battle of Sullivan's Island. Meanwhile, the colonists declare their independence while the revolution rages in the North. General George Washington's forces capture Boston, while New York and Philadelphia fall to the British. Half of America's best ports lay in British hands. Stalemate grips the North. At the end of 1778, the British undertake a Southern strategy, a concentrated effort to subdue the Southern colonies. Should the British have to sue for peace, they prefer to do so with the prosperous Southern colonies under their control. Rice, indigo, cotton, and other cash crops abound in the South, crops that cannot be produced in the British Isles. The High Command, too, is convinced that thousands of Loyalists await their return. By securing the South, the British hope to cut the colonies in two, leave the northern colonies to their own devices, and control the prosperous South. The first blows fall in Georgia. The British capture Savannah and gain a deep water base of operations. Patriot forces counter with the decisive victory at the Battle of Kettle Creek, but it is not enough. In March 1779, the British win at Briar Creek, effectively subduing Patriot forces in Georgia. In April 1779, the British again try to capture Charleston, but are deterred by the arrival of Continental reinforcements. Patriot General Benjamin Lincoln attacks the British rear guard at the Battle of Stono Ferry, but is repulsed. In September 1779, a combined force of French and Continentals set their sights on British-held Savannah, where a lengthy siege and costly assault only end in repulse. The momentum shifts to the British, who again turn their attention to Charleston. Sir Henry Clinton sails from New York to command the attack. By April 1780, the British have laid siege, and the city capitulates on May 12th, resulting in the largest surrender of American forces during the war. In the aftermath, a Patriot relief column bound for Charleston is massacred by Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton in the Battle of Waxhaws. The war had reached a new and bloody phase. With the Continental Command structure in tatters, the South Carolina Patriots fight a partisan war to disrupt British and Loyalist forces. These partisans, commanded by such men as Francis Marion, Thomas Sumter, Andrew Pickens, Elijah Clark, and William Davie, harass and ambush British forces at every opportunity. With the capture of Charleston, Clinton returns to New York, leaving Lord Charles Cornwallis in command to finish the subjugation of the southern colonies. The Continental Congress sends General Horatio Gates to the south with a fresh army to stem the British tide. Cornwallis and Gates clash at Camden, South Carolina, where the Continentals suffer a terrible defeat. For the second time in 97 days, and for the third time in the last 20 months, the Patriots have no regular army in the South, but motivated Patriot militias remain. From his headquarters in Camden, South Carolina, Cornwallis sends Major Patrick Ferguson west to recruit and train Loyalists. Tired of the Patriots' backcountry raids, Ferguson decrees that he will hang their leaders and lay their country waste with fire and sword if the over-mountain men did not lay down their arms. This infuriates the backcountry over-mountain men, who set out over the mountains to confront Ferguson and his army of loyalists. They stop at a place called the Cowpens on October 6th, kill a couple of beef cattle and refresh themselves. At dusk, 910 of the men with the best horses push on toward Kings Mountain, where they heard they would find Ferguson. On October 7th, they envelop the steep base of Kings Mountain and close in on Ferguson's unsuspecting army. At 3 p.m., they attack, firing uphill from the cover of the mountain's boulders and trees. Many of the over-mountain men recognize the faces of family and neighbors in the harried ranks of the Carolina Loyalists. Major Patrick Ferguson, the only British officer present, declares that God himself would not remove him from that mountain. Ferguson is killed during the battle, and at least 8 Loyalists are hanged, punctuating the risk of loyalty to the crown. That same month, George Washington appoints Nathaniel Greene to command the army in the Southern Department. Greene divides his army and sends General Daniel Morgan to the west to spirit up the people and to protect that part of the country. This forces Cornwallis to split his army, and he sends Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton west to protect the entire 96th district and the Star Fort. When Morgan hears that Tarleton is heading his way, he decides to meet him at a well-known pasturing area called the Cowpens, the same place where the over-mountain men had stopped before going to Kings Mountain. Morgan makes an unconventional move and splits his force into 3 main lines of defense and puts the militia in the first 2 lines, with the Continentals in the 3rd line and the Dragoons in reserve. On the morning of January 17, 1781, Tarleton's force charges. The 1st, then 2nd lines of Patriots withdraw. The British then charge the 3rd line, but soon find themselves ensnared in a double envelopment as the withdrawing Patriots reappear on their left and right flank. In less than 30 minutes, a significant portion of Cornwallis's army is destroyed. Greene then adopts a strategy of exhaustion. He moves towards the Dan River on the North Carolina-Virginia border, wearing the British down along the way, pulling them further from their supply base. In the race to the Dan, Patriots used numerous fords and ferries to keep the British guessing. An exhausted British army watches Greene escape across the Dan River intact. The British turned toward Hillsborough, North Carolina, while Greene's revitalized army recrosses the Dan in pursuit. The armies meet in battle at Guilford Courthouse, and Cornwallis would later write that during the battle, the Americans fought like demons. The British win the battle, but suffer more casualties than the Americans, which causes Charles James Fox to state in Parliament that another such victory would destroy the British army. The British fall back toward Wilmington, clearing the way for Greene to retake the Carolinas. On April 25, 1781, near Camden, South Carolina, Greene's forces are bested at the Battle of Hobkirk's Hill. Although a tactical victory for the British, it serves as a strategic victory for the Patriots. From May 22nd to June 19, 1781, Greene, with 1,000 Patriot troops, stages the longest field siege of the Revolutionary War against 550 Loyalists, who are defending 96 from an earthen star fort. Under the direction of Polish freedom fighter Colonel Thaddeus Kosciuszko, the chief engineer of the Patriot Army, the Patriots began digging a mine underneath the Star Fort, planning to pack it with gunpowder and blow it up, thus allowing the Patriots to storm the Loyalist-held Star Fort. However, after dark on June 9, 1781, a small group of Loyalists attacked the Patriot sappers digging the mine. Despite multiple raids, the Patriots continue work on the mine throughout the siege. Then, Greene receives news that British reinforcements are on their way. Time and British troops would soon be closing in on him. On June 18th, Greene makes one last assault on the fort. The attack is a failure, and Greene withdraws his army from 96. Both sides claim victory at Eutaw Springs, South Carolina, on September 8, 1781. But the British casualties are so great, they again withdraw to the Charleston area. Meanwhile, Cornwallis decides to open a final campaign in Virginia to change the odds in his favor. There, the British could receive faster reinforcements and supplies from the British stronghold in New York City, while driving the fight inland to separate the northern and southern colonies. Petersburg, Richmond, Portsmouth, and Norfolk fall into British hands. Cornwallis nearly destroys a force under the command of Washington's protege, the Marquis de Lafayette, at the Battle of Green Spring. By September of 1781, Cornwallis is encamped near Yorktown. Sensing that Cornwallis had backed himself into a corner, a combined American and French force, led by General Washington, rushes to Virginia in hopes of boxing in the British from the landward side, while a fleet of French ships seals off the British from the sea. French and American forces capture key British redoubts to seal their siege lines. After 3 weeks of siege operations, Cornwallis capitulates on October 19, 1781. The war continues for nearly 2 more years, but the major fighting is over. The British evacuate Charleston on December 14, 1782. The Treaty of Paris officially ends the American Revolution on September 3, 1783. Perhaps Nathaniel Greene best summarized the character of the Southern Patriots. We fight, get beat, rise, and fight again. This tenacious attitude ultimately secured America's independence on the numerous battlefields of the South. There is no American land more hallowed and more essential to telling the American story of liberty and freedom than these battlegrounds.